The dragon cub crept along the narrow streets, his tiny wings dragging against the cobblestones, the moonlight glinting off his scales. Like shards of glass, he pressed his body against the walls, hoping no one would see him, and hoping that somehow tonight would be different from all the other nights. He held his broken toy tightly, a wooden soldier missing an arm and a wheel from a little cart, his small claws trembling as he counted the coins he had earned today. They were barely enough to buy a crust of bread and a sip of water, but he clung to them like treasure, and whispered promises to himself that he would not give up yet. The streets were empty except for shadows that seemed to stretch and twist and move with a life of their own, and he shivered, feeling every sound, the clatter of a loose shutter, the distant bark of a dog, the faint echo of footsteps behind him. He darted into a narrow alley, trying to hide the small heap of toys that he had collected in case someone stole them or laughed at him. He remembered the laughter of other children, the warm nests that he had once known before he was alone and abandoned, and a pang of loneliness cut through his chest like a knife. He pressed his face against the cold stone wall and imagined the soft glow of a fire, the gentle hum of lullabies that had faded into smoke and dust. He shivered again, feeling the wind sliced through his scales and curled around his tiny body. He curled up tightly, clutching his toy soldier, as if it could protect him from the vast world that had forgotten him. Every coin he earned felt like a small victory, and yet each one reminded him of how fragile he was, how easily he could vanish if no one noticed him. He tried to keep his eyes open and his heart steady. The alley seemed endless and the night colder than before. He could hear the rustle of rats in the corner and the creak of old shutters swinging in the wind, and he wished desperately for a warm hand, a kind word, a place to rest where he would not have to be afraid of shadows and hunger. He pressed his nose to the cobblestones and let out a tiny whimper that barely reached the stars above, and he thought about tomorrow and the next day and the next, hoping that somehow he could survive another night, hoping that somehow someone would see him and see not just a dragon cub with ragged toys, but a creature who still dreamed of home and warmth and a hand that would not let him go. The dragon cub huddled in the alley, his body curled around the broken toy soldier, and he remembered the warmth of his old nest, the gentle sway of the branches where he had slept, and the soft glow of the fire that had once lit his tiny home. He could still hear the lullabies his mother had hummed in the quiet hours before dawn, and he pressed his forehead against the cold stone, wishing he could feel that warmth again. The streets around him were harsh and unforgiving, and every sound reminded him that he was alone. The laughter of children in the distance sounded like music from another world, a world he could not touch, and he closed his eyes, imagining the soft touch of scales against scales, the brush of wings, and the soothing rhythm of a heartbeat that had once been his own. He remembered the taste of honeyed fruit and the sweet smell of pine and moss, and a pang of longing squeezed his chest so hard he thought it might break. He tried to push the memories away, but they clung to him like shadows in the dark, and he wondered if he would ever feel safe again, if he would ever know the comfort of a warm hand, a gentle voice, or the feeling of being wanted. The wind whispered through the alley, stirring the edges of his tattered toys, and he shivered, wishing that tomorrow might bring something better, wishing that someone might see him not as a creature to fear, but as one who had loved and lost and still had a heart that could feel. He curled tighter around his toy, imagining that somehow it could carry him back to those fleeting moments of peace. He remembered how he had once laughed, how he had once soared above the trees, feeling the wind under his wings, and he made a silent promise to himself that no matter how cold, how empty, how cruel the world might seem, he would keep searching for warmth. He would keep believing that somewhere beyond these streets, someone was waiting to notice him and to hold him, and he whispered into the night that he would not give up, that he would survive, even if it meant selling every toy he had ever loved and dreaming of a home he might never see. Dragon Cub woke before the sun, his stomach twisting with hunger, and his tiny paws clutching the few coins he had earned yesterday. He arranged his toys carefully on a worn blanket, hoping that someone would stop and take notice. Each doll, each wooden soldier, each cracked wheel was precious to him, and each coin it brought felt like a small victory. He hissed softly at the passing rats that dared to sniff too close, and he kept his eyes sharp, scanning the streets for anyone who might offer food or kindness. The morning air was sharp and cold, and his breath made tiny clouds as he waited for the first passerby to stop. He remembered the lessons he had learned in the past few days, to smile even if it felt strange, to lift his small claws and wave even if he wanted to hide, to speak softly and promise carefully, to sell just enough to survive, not too much, not too little. He had become clever in the ways of humans, in the art of survival, and yet Each transaction left a hollow ache in his chest, for he knew that selling his toys meant letting go of memories of warmth and laughter, of moments that had belonged only to him. He pressed his nose against the blanket and whispered promises to himself that he would keep going, that he would not give up, that the world might be cruel, but he would be clever and brave, and he would survive. Each coin that changed hands was a reminder of the distance between him and the home he longed for, a reminder of how small he felt, and how much he still hoped for something more than the cold streets and the fleeting kindness of strangers. And as the sun climbed higher, he tucked the coins into a tiny pouch and kept his eyes open and his heart ready for anything. The night fell hard, and the dragon cub shivered under the pale glow of the moon. The streets were empty, and the shadows stretched long and strange across the cobblestones. He curled tightly around his few remaining toys, wishing for warmth, wishing for a friend, wishing for even a tiny spark of safety. The wind howled through the alleys, rattling shutters and tossing scraps of paper like tiny ghosts, and he pressed himself against the wall, trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear from a world that seemed full of noise and danger. Every creak, every distant bark made his heart jump and his wings tremble. He hugged his toy soldier to his chest, imagining it was a shield against the cold, against the dark, against the loneliness that clawed at him. He thought of the soft glow of his old nest, of the lullabies that had vanished in smoke, and tears filled his eyes. He wished desperately for a place where he would not have to hide, a place where he could eat without fear, where he could sleep without nightmares. The night seemed endless, and the cold crept into his bones like icy fingers. He shivered and whispered to himself that he must survive, that he must hold on, that somewhere someone might come for him, that the world might still hold kindness. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders and pressed his nose to the toy soldier and imagined a warm hand brushing over his scales, and he promised silently that he would keep going, that he would not give in to the darkness, no matter how deep, how sharp, how lonely the night became. And he closed his eyes and tried to believe that tomorrow might be different. Though Dragon Cub huddled in the alley, shivering under the thin blanket of night, he hugged his toy soldier tightly and listened to the distant sounds of the city, wondering if anyone would ever notice him. Then a soft, warm light appeared at the edge of the alley, a human father leaning down with gentle eyes and a kind smile that made the dragon freeze in place. He pressed himself against the wall, unsure if he should run or stay. The human spoke softly, a voice like honey on a cold day, calling the dragon by name, even though the dragon had never heard it before, and the words felt strange and comforting at the same time. The human crouched slowly, keeping his hands low and calm, and for the first time in many nights the dragon felt a flicker of curiosity, flicker of hope. He tilted his head and sniffed the air. The warmth of the human reached him like sunlight through frost, and he hesitated, a tiny claw brushing against the ground. He wanted to believe, but he had learned to fear. He wanted to trust, but the shadows of the streets whispered danger, and yet the human offered no harm, only warmth, only patience, only a gentle presence that made the dragon tremble and wish with all his heart that maybe, just maybe, this stranger could be the home he had dreamed of. The human whispered again and extended a hand, a promise of comfort, and the dragon slowly lifted his gaze and saw not a stranger but a possibility, a chance, a hand that might hold him, not for a moment but for always. And he inched forward, heart-pounding, claws against the stone, knowing that this step could change everything. The dragon cub inched closer to the human, his tiny claws scraping softly against the cobblestones, every muscle in his body tense and trembling. He sniffed the air again, and the warmth of the human hand seemed to reach through the chill and wrap around his scales like sunlight through glass. He wanted to run, he wanted to curl up and hide, but there was something in the gentle eyes, something in the soft voice that made his heart beat faster and ache with a strange hope. He lifted a trembling claw and brushed it against the extended hand. The warmth of it made him shiver, and a tiny hiss escaped his throat, a hiss that was part fear and part wonder. The human did not pull away. Instead, he stayed still, calm and steady, letting the dragon decide, letting him feel safe, letting him know that he would not be hurt. The dragon pressed his nose against the human palm and felt a pulse, a life, a heartbeat that was not harsh or cruel but soft and patient. And he blinked slowly, remembering the lullabies he had lost, remembering the comfort of his old nest, and for the first time in many nights, he felt a flicker of trust, flicker of courage, flicker of longing to be held and to belong. He lifted his other claw and touched the human wrist, and the warmth traveled up his small arms and into his chest, and he realized that maybe it was possible to feel safe again, maybe it was possible to feel love again. The human whispered softly words the dragon did not understand fully, but the tone was like honey, and the dragon leaned into it, leaning into the promise of comfort, leaning into the hope that someone cared, that someone would stay, that someone would not let him go. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the warmth seep into his bones, and when he opened them, he saw the human smiling, and he made a tiny movement, curling his body against the hand, brushing against the palm, and feeling for the first time in what felt like forever that he belonged somewhere, that he was seen, that he was wanted. The wind whispered through the alley, and for the first time, it did not feel cold. It felt like the night itself was holding him, and he pressed closer, trusting slowly, cautiously, daring to hope, and in that moment the dragon cub realized that maybe he had found something he had been searching for all along: a hand to hold him, a heart to care for him, and a promise that he would never be alone again. The dragon cub followed the human cautiously, stepping over cobblestones, his tiny claws making soft taps against the ground. He kept close, watching the warmth of the human's back, the rise and fall of the chest, the gentle sway that seemed to promise safety with every movement. He glanced up at the streetlights flickering, and felt the old fear tug at his heart, but the human did not hurry or scold. He walked slowly, giving the dragon space, giving him time to breathe and decide, and for the first time in many nights, the dragon felt the strange flutter of hope he had never known before. Each step brought him closer to something he could not yet name, but felt deep in his chest, a feeling that whispered of home, of warmth, of belonging. He remembered the cold nights in the alley, the hunger that clawed at his belly, the shadows that had seemed alive with danger, and he realized that with this human he felt none of it, not fear, not hunger, not loneliness, only a soft stirring of trust that grew stronger with each careful step. The human paused, occasionally bending down to offer a scrap of bread or a gentle whisper. The dragon hesitated, sniffed the air, and then accepted its small teeth, barely touching the food but feeling the kindness behind it. Each gesture made his heart beat faster, each touch made him want to curl closer, each smile made him imagine that maybe the world was not so cruel, maybe it held places where a small dragon could feel safe and loved. And as they moved through the quiet streets, the dragon's wings twitched slightly, his scales catching the dim light, and he dared to imagine a new life, a life where he did not have to sell toys to survive, a life where someone would wait for him with warmth and safety. And he pressed his nose against the human's hand and let himself be guided, knowing that for the first time he was not alone, and maybe he never would be again. The dragon cub stepped into the warm glow of the human's home, and the air smelled of firewood and soft blankets, and something sweet he could not name, and he pressed his tiny claws against the threshold, hesitating, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt a place like this before, a place that did not threaten or bite or demand, only a soft, inviting warmth that wrapped around him like a gentle hug. The human knelt down and extended a hand, and the dragon sniffed it slowly, feeling the pulse of life and kindness, and for the first time, he did not flinch. He stepped forward, small wings twitching with curiosity, and he padded across the soft floor, feeling it warm beneath his feet and seeing pillows piled high that promised comfort and blankets that seemed to beckon him to curl up. He glanced at the fire crackling softly and watched the flames dance over the walls. The light flickered across his scales and made him feel almost magical. He pressed closer to the human, and the human whispered, softly brushing a hand down the dragon's back, and the scales tingled under the gentle touch. The dragon found a small nest of blankets in the corner and crawled in and pressed his nose against them and felt warmth seep into his bones, warmth that he had not known he could feel. The human crouched nearby and watched with patient eyes, and the dragon curled tighter around himself, feeling safe, feeling wanted, feeling like he could finally rest. His small chest rose and fell with a calmness that had been foreign for so long, and he let out a tiny sigh, a sigh of relief, a sigh of hope, a sigh that whispered that maybe he had finally found what he had been searching for all these nights, all these days, all these lonely steps. He pressed his nose against the soft blanket again, and dared to close his eyes and sleep, knowing that the human would stay, and the world was no longer only cold shadows, but a place that held light and love, and a home that could finally be his. The dragon cub nestled deeper into the pile of blankets, his tiny body warm and safe for the first time in what felt like forever. He pressed his nose against the human's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath, the soft thrum of a heartbeat that was steady and kind, and he closed his eyes, letting the warmth seep into Every scale, every muscle, every tired bone he had carried through lonely nights and hungry days. He remembered the cold alleys, the broken toys, the shadows that had seemed endless, and he felt a strange flutter in his chest, a mix of relief and wonder and hope. He stretched his small wings, slightly feeling the softness of the blankets and the gentle presence of the human who had not left him alone. Not once. The human whispered softly, brushing a hand down the dragon's back, and the dragon shivered, not from fear but from the touch that spoke of safety and love. He tilted his head and let the hand linger, and in that moment he realized that he belonged here, not in the streets, not in shadows, not in the echoes of the past, but here now and maybe forever. He let out a tiny purr, a sound he had not made in months, and the human smiled and whispered more words he did not need to understand because the tone held everything he needed. And the dragon curled tighter against the warmth, pressing his forehead to the human's chest, and felt the steady beat beneath him, a rhythm that said, "You are home, you are safe, you are loved." And for the first time, he did not worry about tomorrow, did not fear the cold or the hunger, did not remember the loneliness, only the gentle warmth, only the soft whispers, only the steady presence. And he let himself drift into sleep, a sleep full of dreams of soaring above trees with the sun on his scales, a sleep full of hope, full of love, full of a home that was finally his. And in the quiet room with the fire flickering and the human sitting close, he knew that he would never be alone again, that he had found the hand that would not let go, and the heart that would always hold him. And he dreamed with a small smile that the world could be kind and full of light, and he was finally safe.